Small, light, affordable. This is Sony's new 16mm F1.8 G lens, and if you've been looking for a tiny, full-frame wide-angle lens for gimbal and handheld work, I think this is a really great choice. And in this video, I'm going to be reviewing this lens from the perspective of a wedding filmmaker. So if you are someone who films weddings or corporate or commercial videos, documentaries, basically if you get paid to make videos and you're in the market for a compact wide-angle lens, this review is for you. But before we go on, for the sake of ethics, I want you to know this video is not paid or sponsored by Sony, and while they did loan me this lens so I could make this review, it is going to sadly be going back to them very soon. In addition, because I want to help you out even more, if you want a list of all of the gear that I recommend for wedding filmmaking, I would highly recommend checking out my wedding filmmaker gear guide. It's completely free and linked down in the video description. Now, looking at this lens, the first thing you're going to notice is just how small and light it is. And for comparison, I usually think of my Sony 24mm F1.4 as being a very compact and lightweight full-frame lens, but this 16mm 1.8 takes things to a whole other level, weighing only 304 grams, and look at how small it is next to the 24. It's a tiny little baby lens. It's so cute. Now, when Sony first told me about this lens, my immediate comparison wasn't to the 24mm. No, it was to another ultra-wide angle that Sony released a few years ago, their 14mm f1.8 GM lens. That lens was still relatively lightweight, but definitely larger than the 16mm, and spoiler, about double the price too. In addition, and here was the big kicker, that 14mm lens was not capable of taking filters on the front of it because it had such a bulbous front glass element. Instead, if you wanted to use a filter with that lens, it came with a rear filter holder where you would either cut gels or purchase pre-cut gels to slot into it. It was a big pain, and I never bothered to use that feature. And that's a bummer because as a filmmaker, I'm a big fan of using neutral density filters and other cool filters like that, those of which you would usually screw into the front of a lens, which was not possible with that 14mm. Well, thankfully, I'm glad to tell you that with this 16mm, it will take regular filters, and it has a super common filter thread size of 67mm, which can make for even more affordable filters. So yes, I realize this is only a G lens, whereas the 14mm is a GM, indicating that's higher quality. But in my experience, not only using this lens, but with many other newer Sony G lenses, it's been very hard for me to distinguish a quality difference between a G lens and a GM lens, both of which are excellent. And so if you're looking for a wide-angle lens that excels in low light and you're willing to forego those extra 2mm that you get on the wide end with the 14mm GM, and you also want to save some money, in that case, this new 16mm G lens is a real no-brainer and one that I would heavily consider. Talking more about the image quality now, because I know I mentioned that just a moment ago. With this lens in particular, it has a really beautiful image that's very sharp. Let me just say that even if you've used something like a 16-35 f2.8 lens, the jump in the amount of light that you can get and the shallow depth of field that you're going to see going from f2.8 to f1.8 cannot be understated, and you will be able to get noticeable separation of your subject from the background, even at this wide angle, which is really great to see. Not to mention, I know I talked about the size earlier, but whenever you consider this as an f1.8 lens in such a small housing, I think you're going to be really impressed by this lens. I know that I am. Thankfully too, even with this small size, Sony has still managed to fit all of the usual controls you would expect from their GM and G lenses onto this lens. So you're getting an autofocus manual focus switch, programmable button, an aperture controlling with a switch to make it clickless, an iris lock, all easily accessible, just shrunken down to fit onto a smaller lens. Now, as for focus breathing, that has also been an area that Sony has been focusing heavily on improving with their lenses, and I'm happy to say that this one has very minimal focus breathing, and of course, because it supports Sony's breathing compensation feature, you can enable that and have no focus breathing at all on this lens if you want to. In addition, the autofocus performance is excellent, just like pretty much all of Sony's other new modern lenses. The autofocus is very fast and responsive. Looking past all of the tech specs and features now, let's talk about your usage for this lens. As I said at the start, this review is for you if you are a wedding filmmaker, commercial or documentary filmmaker, etc. And let me just say, as someone that has used a 16-35mm extensively over the years, at least in my opinion, the reason that you buy a 16-35mm lens is that you really like the ultra-wide look of 16mm and you want to film with that often. Personally, whenever I have a shot that I want to make look really grand and epic, maybe it's a couple in a field together, or a landscape that I want to make look larger than life. A 16 to 35mm zoomed all the way out to 16mm is usually the lens that I would go for, because that can make whatever you're filming look as grand and epic as it looks to your eyes. Well, this 16mm gives you that grand epic shot that you were looking for, plus some extra depth of field and better low light performance if you want it. And so if you're someone that commonly finds yourself filming with a 16 to 35 and you're usually at 16mm, this may be the lens for you. And at the price that Sony's going to be selling it for, picking one up is kind of a no-brainer too. Sony tells me that this 16mm f1.8 isn't going to be $2,000 something like a lot of their new lenses have been. No, I was pleasantly surprised whenever they told me that they were targeting a price of only $800 for this lens, which, remember, that is half the price that Sony usually charges for their 14mm f1.8. And whenever you consider the kind of shots that a lens like this is going to enable you to get, that's where I think this new 16mm f1.8 G lens is a great choice. Speaking of being a great choice, if you're a wedding filmmaker and you want help booking more weddings, what if I told you I could help you book your next wedding in 30 days or less? Guaranteed. If that interests you, you have to check out my workshop that's going to help you book your next wedding in 30 days or less. This workshop is completely free. It's linked down in the video description, and it's going to show you the exact steps to take to not only find a couple getting married, but have them book you to film their wedding in the next 30 days. It's completely free. You have nothing to lose. Please check it out. It's linked down in the video description. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you want to see more filmmaking tutorials in the future, and have a great day.